I forced my brazen neighbor to take down his surveillance cameras that were pointed directly at my yard, and it cost him more than just privacy.
You ever get that gut feeling that someone's watching you?
That's how this all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon, beer in hand, grilling burgers in my backyard when I noticed the little red light blinking from across the fence. At first, I figured maybe it was just a security light or a motion sensor. But after I noticed it a second time, then a third, I realized that blinking eye was a surveillance camera. And it was pointed straight into my yard. Let me tell you about my neighbor, Carl. Carl's the type of guy who makes HOA meetings feel like FBI interrogations.
Mid-50s, freshly divorced, chip on his shoulder, and suddenly the neighborhood's self-appointed watchman.
Ever since he moved in a few months prior, he'd been nitpicking people's trash cans being out too early, making complaints about unregistered vehicles, aka my brother's project truck, and God forbid you mow your lawn half an inch too tall.
And now?
Carl had three cameras mounted on his second-floor balcony, all angled perfectly to monitor my backyard. At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just trying to keep an eye on his own property and it was a coincidence. But when I waved at the camera while flipping a burger and saw it tilt to follow me, I knew this dude was deliberately spying. So, I did what any reasonable person would do, I confronted him. "Hey Carl," I said, knocking on his door with that kind of forced neighborly smile you put on when you're ready to throw hands under a layer of civility.
"Any reason your security cameras are aimed at my yard?"
He looked me up and down, leaned against the doorframe like he was doing me a favor just answering the door, and said, "It's for my own safety."
"I've had things go missing before. Don't flatter yourself." "Right," I replied. "So your missing flower pots justify filming my wife sunbathing and my kids playing in the backyard?" And then, I kid you not, he smirked. Smirked and said, "If you want privacy, put up a fence higher than 6 feet. Otherwise, it's fair game." I left without saying a word, but in my head, I had already declared war. The line I wouldn't let him cross. The next few days, I documented everything. Every time the cameras panned, every time we were out back and caught on video. I started compiling a folder of timestamps and photos from my own security cams. Yeah, Carl, you're not the only one with a Ring doorbell showing clear evidence that he was actively filming into my property. I even had a video of the guy watching his monitor from his upstairs window. Like some kind of nosy neighborhood big brother. I filed a complaint with the HOA. Nothing.
I contacted local police, they shrugged.
If the cameras are on his property and there's no audio recording, it's not illegal. Fine. So this was going to require a little more creativity.
I looked into those privacy-screened fences, but like Carl said, most cities cap backyard fence height at 6 feet unless you get a permit.
And even then, it's a whole process. That's when it hit me. I didn't need to block the view.
I needed to make it cost him to keep watching.
Operation Petty Warfare begins. It started small.
Every time we went out back, we held up large poster boards with things like "Stop Filming US" and "Carl is a Creep" written on them. My daughter, she's 12 and already a Photoshop whiz, printed out fake surveillance notice signs and taped them to the side of our shed facing Carl's house. But the real fun started with the floodlights. I installed 3 of them, all motion activated, all angled straight back at his cameras. So every time they picked up movement in my yard, bam, 6,000 lumens blasted right back at him. And those things didn't just glare, they ruined his footage.
Massive whiteouts. Lens flares. The whole screen blown out with light every time my dog ran across the yard. Carl came stomping over the next morning, red-faced and puffing like a stewed tomato.
"You need to take those lights down."
"Why?" I said, deadpan. "They're on my property. And if you don't like them, maybe stop pointing cameras at my kids." He stormed off, muttering about calling the city. But he didn't realize I had already checked the code. Motion-activated lights? Totally legal.
Especially when placed for residential safety.
But the next week? That's when things really escalated. The very next week, a city inspector showed up at my door. Not a cop. Not HOA. An actual clipboard-carrying, khaki-pants-wearing city building inspector.
And wouldn't you know it, someone, Carl, had filed an anonymous complaint about my non-permitted floodlight installation and excessive nighttime brightness. I smiled as he rattled off the concerns.
"Oh yeah," I said, "those lights? I actually called the city office last week and made sure they were within code. I even filed a courtesy notice about installing them. You should have a record of that." His eyebrows lifted. "You did?"
Yup. Let me grab the paperwork. I handed over a printed email thread and the receipt for my motion-activated, down-angled, code-compliant lights. The guy read through it, nodded, and actually chuckled. Well, he said, this happens more than you'd think. Have a nice day. And just like that, complaint denied. Now, I could have just been smug and let it go. But oh no, Carl had escalated things by trying to weaponize the system. So I did what any vengeful, over-caffeinated homeowner would do. I started digging into his property records. Enter my secret weapon, the permit search. Let me tell you something about county records, they're public. And if you're nosy enough and have a Saturday afternoon to kill, you can find everything. So I went full spreadsheet mode. I checked permits, building plans, fencing boundaries, easement lines, and that's when I hit gold. Turns out, Carl had built that second-story balcony after moving in. And guess what? No permit. Not only that, but the platform where his cameras were mounted? That little lookout post? Also unpermitted. He had added it for storage, but the city website showed no record of any approved additions for his property in the last 5 years. Now, I'm not a vindictive person by nature, but after being filmed for weeks and dragged through red tape, I was buzzing to press send on that city email. I sent in a formal complaint. With photos. With annotations. With a PDF pointing out how his camera platform extended 2 feet into the property setback zone. And then I waited. The crackdown. 2 weeks later, on another sunny Wednesday morning, the same city inspector was back, but this time, he was knocking on Carl's door. I watched from my living room window with a hot cup of coffee like it was the goddamn Super Bowl. And Carl? Carl looked like someone had just keyed his car and kicked his dog. They were out there for a good 20 minutes, pointing, measuring, taking photos. Then I saw Carl sign something and then walk straight into his house without another word. That night, I got the update from the city portal, notice of violation. Unauthorized construction. 30 days to remove or face fines. Boom. He'd have to take down the platform, and if the platform went, so did the cameras. I was practically vibrating with joy. But Carl wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The dumpster incident. Here's where it gets disgusting. A few nights after the city visit, I heard a weird sound outside. Kind of a thud-thud-thud, like something heavy being dropped over the fence. I grabbed a flashlight and went out back. Carl had dumped bags of trash into my yard. I'm talking torn black contractor bags filled with God knows what. Rotten food, old paper, beer bottles, stuff that reeked of desperation and deli meat. I didn't even confront him. I just dragged the bags to my driveway, called the cops, and filed a report. He denied it, of course, but guess what? Remember my own cameras? They caught him in the act. I showed the footage to the officer, and just like that, Carl got cited for illegal dumping. Fined $500 and had to pay for cleanup. That was the moment he cracked. The next day, I caught him outside, yanking his cameras off the mounts like they were diseased. One fell and shattered on the pavement. I didn't say a word, just gave him a little wave as I watered my roses. And I thought that would be the end of it. But nope. 1 week later, I got served court papers. I was sipping my morning coffee, scrolling through work emails, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a dude in khakis, badge on his hip, holding a manila envelope. You, my name? Yup. You've been served. He handed me the papers and walked off like this was just another Tuesday for him. I flipped through the stack. Carl was suing me for intentional harassment, emotional distress, and destruction of property. Yeah. You read that right. Apparently, my floodlights had damaged his surveillance equipment and caused him mental anguish. He even included some dramatic paragraph about how he felt unsafe in his own home because of my aggressive light installation. I'll admit, I laughed. Like, full-on belly laughed at my kitchen table for a solid minute before I called my buddy Brandon, who happens to be an attorney. I texted him a photo of the papers with the caption. Wanna have some fun? Discovery, aka digging for more dirt. Brandon was all in. We filed our response, requested discovery, and gathered our own mountain of documentation, timestamps, photos, emails to the city, the video of Carl chucking trash into my yard, and cherry on top, the permit violation notice with the city's signature still fresh. Carl had no idea what was coming. Our court date was set for a month out, but I got updates through the legal grapevine. Apparently, Carl actually thought he was going to win. He even told people on Nextdoor that he was suing me for attacking his constitutional rights. Dude really thought this was a Supreme Court case. Meanwhile, I was digging deeper. Through a friend who knew someone at the city clerk's office, I got a list of every permit Carl had pulled over the last year. Turns out, not only was his balcony illegal, but so was the weird stone patio he built out back and the fire pit made from stacked concrete blocks that was technically a safety hazard. You ever see someone dig their own grave with a golden shovel? That was Carl. The courtroom spectacle. When the court day finally rolled around, I showed up clean-cut, calm, and loaded with evidence. Carl? He rolled in with a file folder, a neck brace, I kid you not, and a smug look like he was about to win $1 million lawsuit. The judge was a sharp, no BS woman named Judge Harmon, and she wasn't playing. Carl's lawyer, some guy who clearly worked for cheap, started with a dramatic monologue about Carl's mental trauma from being visually assaulted by floodlights. He even claimed Carl had to sleep in a different room because of the severe light sensitivity triggered by his neighbor's actions. I glanced at Brandon, who scribbled something on his legal pad and pushed it toward me. It said, "Is he allergic to photons now?" I almost lost it. Then it was our turn. Brandon opened by showing the judge the permit records, or lack thereof, for Carl's second-story platform. Then came the city violation order. Then the video of Carl tossing trash into my yard like a drunk raccoon. Carl's face started to melt into panic. But the real knockout punch? Brandon called our surprise witness, Officer Hayes, the cop who responded to the dumping incident. And Officer Hayes? He did not hold back. He testified that Carl had been evasive, hostile, and unapologetic, and that my video footage clearly showed him illegally disposing of garbage onto private property. He also confirmed I had been cooperative and courteous throughout. Judge Harmon's expression was stone cold. When Carl's lawyer objected that the trash wasn't relevant to the lighting case, the judge literally said, "It speaks to a pattern of retaliatory behavior. I'll allow it." Boom. Verdict time. After both sides rested, Judge Harmon didn't even take it under advisement. She looked at Carl and said, and I quote, "This court finds the plaintiff's claims to be not only unfounded but part of a larger pattern of antagonistic behavior." Then she turned to me. "You are well within your rights to protect your privacy. Motion to dismiss is granted. Mr. My name, you are also entitled to court costs and attorney's fees." Carl's jaw hit the table. He tried to sputter something, but the judge banged her gavel like she was ending a Law and Order episode. Court dismissed. But wait, there's more. Carl's comeuppance goes public. Later that week, someone anonymously posted the entire courtroom summary to our neighborhood's Facebook group, complete with quotes from the judge and screenshots of the city violations. The caption? "Smile, Carl, you're no longer the one watching." People were losing it in the comments. Carl deleted his account the next day. And me? Oh, I was just getting started. Because remember that illegal fire pit? Yeah, the city had a little surprise for Carl the following week. So, you remember Carl's janky backyard fire pit? The one he built out of old concrete pavers like he was recreating a Viking funeral site? Well, not long after our courtroom clash, the city finally caught up with that, too. One night I was out back, enjoying a beer in the sweet scent of not being spied on, when I saw flashing lights reflecting off my kitchen windows. Fire truck. 2 squad cars. All parked in front of Carl's house. I jogged around the front just in time to see firefighters hosing down his backyard, where his unpermitted fire pit had gone full-blown bonfire. Apparently, Carl tried to burn some yard waste, except it got windy, and embers started floating over the fence line into my yard and the one behind him. Some dry leaves caught, my wooden planter box was scorched, and the neighbor's trampoline got a lovely new melted hole. And that? That was the end of it. The legal aftershock. The fire department issued Carl a hefty citation, $2,500, for unlawful open burning. And the fire marshal made it real clear. This isn't a campground. You don't get to play caveman in suburbia. Meanwhile, the neighbors were furious. Everyone from 2 houses down started speaking up. Turns out, Carl had pissed off more people than just me. He reported one guy's Halloween decorations for being offensive. He yelled at a mom for her kid riding a scooter too loudly. He filed noise complaints about a 4th of July barbecue that he was invited to. So when word got out that he caused a fire hazard? It was open season. The neighborhood revolt. The HOA, which had been annoyingly passive during this whole ordeal, suddenly turned into the Avengers. They held an emergency board meeting. They reviewed every complaint ever filed about Carl. Turns out, Carl had been abusing the complaint system to target people he didn't like. Half of them were baseless. The board, now seeing him as a liability, voted unanimously to 1. Issue Carl a formal warning. 2. Fine him $1,000 for HOA rule violations. 3. Require him to remove all unauthorized structures or face litigation. Then they did something I never thought they'd do. They opened a petition to have Carl removed from the HOA entirely. Now, this isn't easy. You can't just kick someone out of an HOA. But you can pursue legal action to restrict someone's voting rights, committee access, and block them from filing complaints if they've been found to abuse the system. And Carl? Carl was about to get neutered. The final move, retaliation, or so he thought. At this point, Carl was unraveling. His balcony was gone. His cameras were gone. His fire pit? Literally ash. His reputation in the neighborhood? Dumpster fire. So what does he do? He leaves me a letter. Not an apology. Not a cease and desist. A letter with a threat. It was handwritten, all shaky cursive like someone's grandpa wrote it after a bottle of whiskey. You think you've won. But I still know people. I still have ways of making things difficult for you. You better watch yourself. I showed it to Brandon. We filed a restraining order the next morning. And that was the nail in the coffin. The Big Bang exit. The restraining order was served within 48 hours. Carl was ordered to cease contact, in person and digitally, and to stay 100 feet from my property line unless inside his house. And then, like fate had a twisted sense of humor, I heard through the grapevine that Carl's mortgage had jumped. Apparently, when the city red-tagged his property for violations and fines, his home insurance pulled back, classifying him as a high-risk homeowner. His premiums tripled. Then his job? Gone. Somebody, not me, I swear, sent a copy of his court records and HOA complaints to his employer, a security firm. They quietly let him go due to conduct unbecoming. A month later, a for sale sign went up in his yard. Carl packed up and left. Not a word. Not a goodbye. I watched from my porch as he drove off in his beat-up Ford Escape, the backseat piled with garbage bags and what looked like the remains of his backyard furniture. And when he turned the corner out of our cul-de-sac, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in a year. The celebration. That weekend, the neighbors threw a barbecue. No joke. A Carl is gone party. We grilled. We drank. We toasted marshmallows over a safe, city-approved fire pit in my yard. Someone brought over a fake surveillance camera and we hung it on a stick like a trophy. And as we sat there, laughing, sipping beer under the stars, I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts or the cops. Sometimes it comes from knowing the rules better than the guy who thought he could break them all. Carl was gone. The for sale sign came down, the moving truck rolled out, and just like that, poof. The street felt lighter. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room that had been suffocating for months. The house sat empty for a few weeks. I'd glance out the window sometimes and see the curtains swaying in the breeze, like the house itself was breathing again. Then the new owners showed up. Young couple. Newly married. Super chill. Let's call them Mark and Dana. They moved in with a dog, a grill, and no security cameras. I introduced myself, brought them some homemade ribs, and welcomed them to the neighborhood. Dana laughed, thanks. You're not one of those HOA freaks, are you? Oh, sweet summer child. The letter in the wall. 3 weeks after moving in, Mark knocked on my door holding a Ziploc bag with something inside. Dude, he said. You're not gonna believe what we found. Inside the bag? A USB flash drive. Dirty. Half melted. Dug out from behind a false wall panel in Carl's old garage. Apparently, they were putting in new shelving when the drywall crumbled and a small wooden box fell out. Inside was the drive, and a folder labeled insurance docs, except all it had was a single password-protected zip file. Now, I don't normally meddle in other people's business. But Mark was curious. And I was still pissed. We plugged the thing into a sandboxed laptop. After a little help from a tech-savvy friend, okay, fine, it was my 14-year-old niece, we got it open. What we found made our jaws drop.
Carl's real obsession. The folder wasn't full of insurance files. It was full of videos. Dozens. Dated. Titled with names.
Mine, other neighbors, even footage from inside cars parked on the street. Some were normal, front yard ring-style clips.
But others?
Others were deeply invasive.
He had zoomed in videos of me and my wife having dinner on the patio. Footage of kids playing in their yards. Even a night vision clip of someone through a kitchen window. Carl wasn't just paranoid. He was obsessed. I felt a wave of nausea. And rage. Cold, simmering rage. We called the police immediately. The investigation that followed.
Turns out, Carl had been reported once before in his previous neighborhood for suspicious camera use, but nothing ever stuck. He claimed it was for his own protection. But with the new evidence, the local PD opened an actual investigation. And the rabbit hole went deep. Apparently, Carl had been posting under an anonymous username in a surveillance tech forum, bragging about his perimeter monitoring setup and how neighbors have no idea how easy they are to track.
Multiple screenshots matched timestamps on the drive.
They found gear in his garage: long-range mics, custom lenses, a freaking frequency jammer, illegal, by the way, and a backup power source hidden under his workbench.
Dude wasn't just a creep. He was one blackout away from becoming the villain in a home invasion thriller. But here's the part that gave me goosebumps. One file. Titled simply Plan. It was a document.
A Word file, 2 pages long.
Outlined with bullet points.
Escalate complaints await for retaliation, record behavior, report abuse, force legal action, sue for damages, reclaim control.
The last line?
If this fails, consider relocating and trying again.
Preferably a cul-de-sac with low-tech neighbors. He had planned this. He'd done it before. The aftermath.
The cops tracked Carl down in a neighboring county, living in a rented condo, using a different last name, probably trying to lay low. They brought him in for questioning.
I don't know the full legal outcome. Investigations like this move slow.
But I do know charges were being considered for invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, and tampering with property.
The drive was turned over as evidence.
And just like that, Carl's past came back to haunt him.
Meanwhile, I was asked to give a statement. I did.
I also sent the entire neighborhood a copy of what we found, sanitized, of course.
I wanted everyone to know what we had lived next to. And let me tell you, people were shaken.
Even the ones who once defended Carl as misunderstood now looked at that empty house with a mix of dread and disbelief. The peace we earned.
Months passed. Seasons changed.
Mark and Dana hosted barbecues, the neighborhood relaxed, and we all started breathing normally again.
And me?
I took down the floodlights.
Not because I had to.
But because I wanted to finally live without thinking about Carl watching.
One day, I found a box on my porch. No note.
Just a package wrapped in plain brown paper.
Inside? A broken security camera. One of his. The lens cracked, the mount twisted. No explanation. Just a trophy. Final thoughts. You never really know what someone's capable of. Carl started out as just an annoying neighbor with some over-the-line cameras.
But he turned into something much darker.
It wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about power. It was about control. And in the end, that's what I took from him.
So if you ever catch a blinking red light pointed where it shouldn't be, don't ignore it.
Sometimes, it's just a camera. But sometimes, it's a warning sign.